Welcome to Never Rewrite. I'm Isaac Askew.
And I'm Jeffrey Sherman. And today we're going to discuss if it's okay to do full rewrites when it comes to architecture.
Yeah, so I kind of ran into this recently where one of the clients I'm working with was basically needing some architecture ported.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they had an EC2 instance, just a single instance, and their end goal was to have kind of a more stable system that they could deploy to without taking down production.
Mm-hmm.
So, with a single instance, whenever you deploy, you might briefly have some downtime as you're trying to deploy your new changes because you've
Yes.
only got one instance. So, if even if your deploy is very fast, there might be one unfortunate second where a customer is, navigating to your site, and they might see a broken web page in between, right before your deploy gets done.
Right.
So they wanted to move towards this newer system of nice kind of load balanced instances,
Mm-hmm.
more modern architecture, essentially. And as we started helping them out with this, I started running into some interesting parallels that were supposedly bad in the never rewrite coding realm. Um,
Well, so I think it's worth putting out there just at the start
mhm.
from our past discussions. One of the few times when we say you do it have to do a rewrite is when you have to do a fundamental technology shift.
Mhm.
Like if you're using some technology that is wholly inappropriate, sometimes you do have to do a full rewrite because you can't feces ship your way. You can't iteratively change your way from Visual Basic to
Right.
anything.
Yeah, if there was one particular coding language or something that could solve the problem, or you just built it in the wrong language or something like that. Yeah.
Or I remember one case where the program was a what did they call it back then? VBA, Visual Basic in Excel macro
Hmm.
that connected to a production database and did all kinds of things in Excel. And it's like, well, we can recreate that functionality for you, but we cannot scale this up and go forward with it. It's got to be a full rewrite. Like that's just wholly inappropriate.
Got it. Well,
So the point there, sorry.
no, I was just going to say in this case, yeah, the solution kind of like I guess the technologies became inappropriate. So I imagine
Mm-hmm.
if you had your own on premises server and then you were the back you're going to migrate that to AWS back 10 years ago or something when people started
Mm-hmm.
doing all this push to migrate. At the time, it wasn't necessarily bad technology to have an on-prem server. That was just the way you did it.
Just how it was.
Um, and so then you are, basically, is this a rewrite, moving it to different architecture? So some examples I had laid out there that I thought were just some interesting ones as we were going through this process is that when we wanted to move all this to be defined in Terraform, this new system that we were going to build.
Mm-hmm.
So it actually is code too, instead of it just being architecture. It's architecture as
Right.
code. Interestingly, um, so you're building a brand new thing. So in
Mm-hmm.
our first episode, we talked about this Big Bang cutover and a greenfield kind of new application thing. So you're building this net new system that you're spinning up to live alongside your old system briefly while you test to make sure that the brand new system does the same things your old one does. You've got to maintain parity between the old and the new environments. One example that we ran into is that somebody made an Apache config change for expanding PHP Max workers,
Mm.
and they did that on the box in EC2. And we went, oh, next time you
Yeah.
do that, you should let us know the changes you're making. That way we can, codify that in the Terraform repo. So we're still
Yeah.
maintaining
Keeping things
parity.
in sync, that's one of the killers on any kind of project like this.
Right, which again back in the old never rewrite coding version of this is basically when you split your forces and a customer asks for a feature change and you have to
Mm-hmm.
rebuild that feature in the new system as well. So you have this kind of like growing parallel work. Um, Same thing with like environment variables. People were putting environment variables on the server in the box directly.
Mm-hmm.
Then we're like, okay, well, we're going to do this in Terraform, where we pull down from a secret and parameter store instead, and we're going to put the secrets in parameter store. And so we still have to do this kind of thing where people are still adding functionality to the old system, and we have to do the work of understanding what changes are being done to the system and making sure the parity remains. There's also the case that undocumented or ill-documented artifacts of the old system can unexpectedly be required in the new system.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is where just every build, like it used to be in the old days, getting your computer set up to build was like an all-day thing, and then there'd be servers, and getting servers built would be an all-day thing because there'd always be stuff that wasn't documented or was badly documented. And like every time you have to build a server, this is one of the Kubernetes and Docker, I guess it's Docker more than Kubernetes, solved really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, making sure that it all worked on the same machine for sure. So one of the interesting things we ran into was we were kind of blocked from scaling horizontally in the new architecture that they wanted, like multiple EC2 instances but behind a load balancer.
Mm-hmm.
Because the way they were storing files on the old instance was basically kind of like they interpolated what the file path should be based on the user's ID. So instead of storing like the entire path to something in the database, instead it pointed at a particular location on that EC2 instance.
Jesus, that's not safe.
Well, it pointed to the instance.
Yeah, sorry. Commentary.
So we couldn't scale it horizontally because what if you got load balanced to one box and you're doing actions in that box and you create new files and store them on that server, and then the next time you visit, you get load balanced to another instance which doesn't have those files. So we actually ran into new work just porting because we're like, we need to find a way to share the file system between two EC2 instances.
Well,
go ahead.
I'm just curious, what was the solution you went? Because I can think of two ways to go about it in an iterative fashion.
One of the proposed solutions was to move to S3, just to put everything in S3 and then refactor the areas that talked to user files for putting and retrieving.
That was my first thought, yeah.
And it was speculated that would be about 20 to 30 hours of refactoring work, which would take longer than what the client needs.
Yeah.
So the other solution was to use EFS and put everything in EFS and mount that directory between the two shared file systems, or it's between the two EC2 instances, rather.
Oh, that's a good one, too. I didn't think of that. My other one was use the Amazon's ALB and just ensure that all the endpoints that talk to files are pegged to one instance and that everything else is load balanced.
Yep. That is another interesting solution. I'd forgotten about that one.
But yeah, the EFS is probably the best one.
Yeah, it's a little more expensive than S3, but not expensive enough to justify the amount of expense that S3 solution and refactoring would have taken.
Right.
And we could always go that route too if it becomes the case where that cost becomes a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just something we didn't think about because we're like, oh, we want to scale horizontally. This should be easy. Then we're like, oh, well, because of their architecture, we actually need to refactor a bit of this as well. So all that to say, like, these were things that I just kind of started laughing to myself because I'm like, this is kind of similar code issues where we're like, don't rewrite because you run into all this risk stuff and there's a big bang cutover because we're gonna have to do like a DNS swap to point to the new instance once we've QA'd it. And these are essentially rewriting architecture, so to speak. We're rewriting in this sense.
Well, why is there a DNS change? Like, couldn't you set up an ELB or ALB, whatever they're called these days, a load balancer, and have the DNS point to that, and that load balancer can just point to the one server, and then when you're ready, you just change which servers. Like the DNS part doesn't seem like it would need to change.
Oh, sure, you could either way do it that way. Regardless, you're cutting over from one system to the new system. I guess you could the way you're describing it, you could probably gradually swap it to the traffic over to the new one, which is an interesting method.
Right. Well, in my mind, if you've got the part that to me would be hard is if you have to move the database.
Mm-hmm.
But like if you've got one actual EC2 instance that's your server, and then you want to move it to a group of Dockerized servers that may be on one machine or maybe on 20 machines, but you've got multiple of them. If they're all talking to the same database, then once you get past things that are like local storage, which you're going to solve with EFS,
Mm-hmm.
then you can just gradually bring in the new cluster with a load balancer, and then gradually pull out the old server, and then you don't ever really have a big bang. You've just iterated. You've done a more of a blue green
Yeah, I
deploy.
guess you can slowly do it that way as well. But yeah, I'm not necessarily trying to get into the nitty gritty details of implementing this cutover. I was just saying, in essence, as I was going through and implementing this, I was seeing a lot of parallels and
Gotcha.
things that we were telling ourselves not to do in the old system when it comes to code rewrites, or like all these kind of things that we would basically said were risky things. Or
Yeah.
I think this is like kind of like an exception where, like, in some cases you would have a big bang cutover. Like in some cases you might actually be going from on-prem to AWS, and you have to
Sure.
find a way to actually do something like that.
Right. If you're going from an on-prem to AWS, or if you switch clouds or something, you're
Right.
going to have some kind of a big bang. But it's important, interesting thing you've mentioned here, which is you ended up going through a lot of the steps, which is, you started building them up in parity, and then you discovered all the undocumented things, and you had to
Mm-hmm.
recreate them, and it took extra time because you weren't expecting it. Right. So this infrastructure code, you are hitting the exact same concerns that you would hit with trying to do a full rewrite, which is, there's all this stuff that's undocumented and things get changed, and
Right.
keeping the two in parallel.
Yeah, just Dockerizing the application was, we had to like get on different servers and find environment variables and understand how the system is working, just so we could actually set up the config correctly for Docker. And it's
Oh,
like there's a lot of documentation, a lot of effort there.
you're giving me reminders of the bad old days when every server was unique, and something would work on one server and it wouldn't work on the other server.
Yeah.
And if you were at a big company which had compliance things, developers weren't allowed to be on the servers. And so I just had a flashback to a time when literally I was on a phone debugging. Like, so the IT person at the data center was reading me from the console, and I'm trying to sit there and imagine what he is telling me. And he has no idea what he's talking about. He's just reading the console to me, but like it was Java and he wasn't like familiar. So he
Yeah.
was just like reading blah dot blah dot blah dot blah blah blah, and I'm just like, oh god, like I don't know what to tell him to look for because I don't know what's wrong, and just bad days.
Yeah. So I guess the question here is it okay to rewrite if it's architecture, or are we saying that this is kind of housed underneath that exception that we had earlier, which is like the technology isn't good for the job now, and that's just a different forcing function, and that to scale you have to change technologies.
Well, I'm kind of biased towards you could still iteratively do it just from the description we're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're going from there, this is a situation where there some amount of big bang is inevitable, but there's still stuff that you can do iteratively to approach it. So whether you're going from on-prem or like EC2 to Docker, like the first thing you can do is Dockerize it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then switch from your bare metal or virtual metal to a Dockerized thing. Now you've reduced the risk because now you can take your containers and you can deploy your containers in a new cloud or to the cloud, and in theory they'll work exactly the same. So like those are the kinds of things you can still do, which would still greatly cut risk versus, okay, we're gonna move first and then containerize second.
True. Yeah, I guess maybe the way that we've done it, we did Dockerize first. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
guessing maybe the way we've done it was kind of the iterative approach. It just still felt rewrite-y in essence,
Yeah,
because it's
definitely you're
net
gonna.
new. Yeah.
It, yeah, sometimes there is no choice, but you were able to still at least reduce the number of steps and reduce the amount of the work in progress,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, you're now running the risk that, hey, you're going to deploy these containers and the containers aren't going to work right. But like on the new cloud, but you've
Hmm.
already proven that the containers are right and that the app will run there and that it'll talk to the database and everything else. So like you knocked down a good percentage of the things that could go wrong.
Right. Okay. So is this is thesis shipping from
It's
architecture's point of view?
it's still thesis shipping. It's still, yeah, it's still find ways to make the risk to get more of your work into production earlier, right? So Dockerizing your server got more of that work into production earlier. It
Right.
got you doing all those environment variable things earlier. Uh, so you still thesis shipped, I would say.
Okay.
You know, there was unfortunately still some large risk at the end where you had to do the Big Bang cutover, and yeah, I don't see any way around that. But you were still able to greatly reduce versus setting up new servers and cutting over and hoping it all worked.
Right. So cool. That answers my question, then, I guess. Either way, I thought it
Yeah,
was a useful or very interesting thing to discuss today, just because of those parallels.
yeah, no, it's super. Yeah, it's very similar. It's containers all the way down, thesis ships all the way down. Awesome. Thank you for listening. I'm Jeffrey Sherman.
And I'm Isaac Askew, and this is Never Rewrite.